Hey everyone, you're listening to the TEN7 Podcast, where we get together every fortnight, and sometimes more often, to talk about technology, business, and the humans in it. I'm your host, Ivan Stegic. Let's talk about Drupal Flyover Camp 2019 that happened from Friday the 31st of May to Sunday the 2nd of June in Kansas City. Joining me to give her thoughts is Socket Wench. That's Wench, not Wrench. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hello.
Now, did I say it the right way? Because I know you always have a specific way of saying it when you give your intro to Socket Wench.
Well, that's pretty close. That works.
Close? Okay, good. So you were at Flyover Camp. What's in the name? I just love how Flyover Camp were poking fun at themselves in Kansas. I mean, we're pretty much in flyover land here in Minneapolis too, so I totally get it.
So let's first frame what that is, because if we're having international listeners, they might not get what the reference is.
Good idea.
So the thing that goes with it is, if you're from the Midwest, you're considered in flyover country. And the reason why is because the joke goes that there's nothing in the United States that's of interest unless if you're on either coast, which is actually completely untrue. However, that is what a lot of people tend to think of it. So as a result, if you're in the Midwest, you kind of go, well, you know what? We're going to own that term.
Exactly.
We're going to go and name things after it. Take that, world.
Yeah, I love it. I love that they did that. Drupal Flyover Camp in Kansas City, Missouri. And so this is a brand new camp, right? This is the first time they've ever done this camp. How great is that? We have a new camp on the schedule.
Yeah, I was surprised that it was new, because they hit everything running. It felt like this was a well-oiled machine for a camp.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful to have that on the calendar again. So, well-oiled machine. Did you recognize any of the organizers? Maybe these guys or these people have done it before.
I think that I recognized a few people from, what is their name? VML and YL. What are they called now? Because they merged with somebody.
I don't know. Who?
VML Y and R. Wow, that is a mouthful.
VMN Y and M R Y R. What?
Victor, Mike, Lima, Yankee, and Romeo. Victor, Mike, Lima, Yankee, and Romeo.
Okay. They're a global... What are they? A global marketing agency that needs a new name.
That is their new name.
Okay, I don't even know how to say it. Vimiliar.
They used to be another two different companies that got merged, and this is the resulting name.
Oh, it's on their About page. If you're looking for something about VML, you can still visit the VML website. If you're looking for something about YNR, don't switch. You can still visit the YNR. So it's basically, like you said, a concatenation of their former names. Maybe it's just temporary. Okay, a little bit of a tangent. So some sort of experience in Flyover Camp organization. Sounds like you said they were a well-oiled machine. It was a 3-day camp?
I believe so. There was a day of trainings, which I did not attend, and then 2 days of sessions, which actually has been bucking a trend lately.
Yeah, and also, from what I can tell, there were contributions as well on Sunday. So maybe it was a 4-day camp if there were trainings as well.
Might have been.
Yeah. So you were there Friday, Saturday. It looked like that they had numerous tracks. So I thought usually these camps have 5 tracks, and then you have 5 rooms, and people go to the room for the track that they're interested in. This felt like it had a dozen tracks, but 3 rooms, and it sort of was interspersed track sessions and BOFs as well amongst these 3 rooms. Is that what it was like? I mean, I'm only gauging from the website.
So, the thing with the tracks is that a lot of the time it depends on how how promoted they are as their own top-level entity in the data, as it were. And some camps do a very good job of this, that they have, this track, and this track. I think, like, DrupalCon recently reorganized so that there's only particular tracks that they directly advertise to different audiences, like a business audience, a front-end audience, something like that. Some camps have a lot of tracks, and they're not particularly consistently organized. Or if they are, it doesn't feel like that when you're attending because you don't tend to notice it. And Flyover Camp seem to fall into this latter category. That's not bad, but it's just a thing.
Yeah, and I love that the tracks were so diverse as well, right? There was security, QA, site building, the usual front-end, back-end stuff. And there was a self-care track as well. I mean, more of that, please. More mental health stuff, more business stuff, more human-focused sessions. I love it. I love it. I think that's awesome. And it looked like there were about 30 sessions, so similar to Drupaldelphia. And those 30 sessions were spread across 2 days as opposed to 1 day at Drupaldelphia.
Yeah, and it seemed to attract a lot of people from the area. I mean, I was there from Minnesota, and I saw people that usually I see at DrupalCorn there as well. So it attracted a lot of people from the Midwest.
That's wonderful. And there were BOFs as well, and it kind of looked like they were spread out across the 2 days as well.
I think there were, but I was so focused on other stuff that I completely missed them.
Yeah, this was a heck of a camp for you. I mean, it wasn't one session; it was 2 sessions.
Oh man, it was a double feature. That was hard.
I'm sure you absolutely shone on that, and I'm sure you did really well. So let's talk about those 2 sessions. So you had your first session on Friday was the famous cloaked talk, Kubernetes called Return of the Clustering, right? The third part of the trilogy. So that was Friday. And then Saturday, you gave a talk essentially about the health check module, right? What can you do to keep tabs on the health of your Drupal site?
Well, it was also about site auditing as well in general.
That's right, and site auditing. So I guess the critical question here is, did you wear a costume for both talks?
So here's the problem with that. I don't have a car. And in order to actually get the costume for that one, I would have probably had to rent a car to go to a local thrift store chain called Axeman Surplus and see if I could find like a stethoscope or whatever that little, satellite dish headgear thing that they wear. I forget what it's called. And see if I can shove one of those into my luggage. But I didn't have the time to do that. Every weekend that I've had lately has just been completely booked up.
Well, maybe we'll have to work on that if you get asked to do that talk again, and we'll figure out another costume for you.
Well, rumor has it that's going to happen.
Comparatively, how were the 2 sessions attended? Was there a drop of people on Saturday compared to Friday, or was it comparable?
It was actually the other way around. I think a lot of people find the Kubernetes talk, it's fun, but it can be very intimidating because it seems like, oh, that's a very DevOps-y, very technical talk, and it's going to be way over my head. And I was able to attract some people to come to it, especially by making a fool out of myself by dressing up like a Jedi and standing outside of my door waving a lightsaber to actually have people come and join the session. It was a smaller room, and it was still well attended, but the site audit talk actually had a lot more people in it, mostly because it was also in the main auditorium. So a lot of people who were just there were also just there, but there was a lot of people paying attention to it as well, because it tends to be a really fun, engaging talk, and it tends to appeal to a much broader audience than the Kubernetes talk, which tends to be, more infrastructure-y, DevOps-y people, even though I try to make that as broadly appealing as I can.
So location, right? You had a wonderful location in the auditorium for that talk.
Yeah, the only downside is that when you're in an auditorium, you're usually on a pedestal or a dais or something like that, and The problem is that it sounds like, I'm a T-Rex walking around on stage because the thing is hollow, so the microphone just picks up everything. And I don't tend to stay still when I give a talk. I tend to gesticulate and walk around and do lots of weird things. And
jump around, I believe you do as well.
Yeah. Well, I think the side out of talk, I also fall to my knees at one point dramatically. I still remember skinning my knee at DrupalCon doing that.
Well, it's a good torque. I think it's valuable as you do that. It certainly reminds people how important it is, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you think the biggest question was that people had from that health check talk, from that audit talk?
I didn't get many questions. I was actually thinking about this a few days ago. I tend not to get that many questions directly after a talk because usually my talks last the entire amount of time. And afterwards, I have to rush out the door for the next person to actually start setting up their talk. And usually I don't get many questions. And I do try to anticipate a lot of the potential questions as well within the contents of the talk. So sometimes people will come by and ask me questions later, but often that hasn't happened lately.
It's a similar sort of thing for both talks then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did have a nice conversation with someone. I think they're from the U of Kansas. I forget. I remember their face. I know that they go to DrupalCon regularly too. But they were telling me about Kubernetes operators and all of that kind of nifty technical stuff. And that was a really interesting conversation to have. But it really wasn't a question.
Well, that actually leads me into my next question. Usually you're the one educating people about whatever you're talking about. What did you learn in your talk from the audience?
So one thing that definitely occurred to me is that when it comes to the Kubernetes talk is just how much technical knowledge you need to, and all technical terms you need to pick up very, very quickly to get anywhere with understanding Kubernetes without feeling like you're drowning in technical terms all of a sudden. And I certainly had that experience myself just trying to learn Kubernetes in the first place. And that is after having a very strong background in how containers work and how Docker works. And some of the terminologies I picked up from running production workloads in Docker Swarm. And I thought that I realized that after that talk, wow, in 45 minutes, I take you from, kind of sort of what Docker is, and you kind of sort of know, you might have heard of Ansible, but you don't know too much about it, to here's how you run a Drupal site in production on Kubernetes using a simple, effective formula. And that kind of struck me as, wow, no, not many people are doing that because, wow, that can be really complicated.
Yeah, it's the bleeding edge of it, isn't it?
It's not just the bleeding edge, it's just that the underlying design that I kind of went for strives for minimalism and simplicity. And a lot of people find that appealing because it reduces the number of working parts that you actually have to know. A good example would be Memcache. The way that it's presented in the talk is as a stateful set. And that works. A lot of people will say what you should do is run it as another object called a daemon set. But in order to introduce a daemon set, I'd have to introduce a completely new object type that only works for that. And afterwards, it's like, is that really necessary to talk about it? Do you really need... How often do you add and remove nodes? If you are already thinking about adding and removing nodes, you're probably going to look up this stuff for you. So I don't need to actually tell you about this in this talk.
Yeah, I love that you're able to educate people in one session, even at a very high level, to go from kind of knowing to being interested in the technology and in what we're doing, and in being interested in continuing to find out more. And maybe that's a good maybe that's a good reason to actually do a separate podcast just on the talk you gave and kind of the contents of the talk. And like, why are we doing that? Why is TEN7 investing as much as we are in Kubernetes and in Docker and in Drupal and in, sending you to all of these camps and in putting all of this work into the open source domain? Like, maybe there's enough there to talk about. I mean, just from my perspective, we want to be independent and using a hosting solution that is supported in the open source, that is vendor agnostic. And if we're doing it for ourselves, there's no reason why we couldn't put it out there and have others learn and leverage from it as well. So we should probably talk about this a little more in a separate podcast.
That's not a bad idea at all.
I love it. Okay, we'll do that. We'll ask Jonathan to make that happen for us. Okay, so a little more about Kubernetes. I was looking through the schedule of talks, and as you, Tess, know, Raspberry Pis are really near and dear to my heart. I've used them for many different things at home, most recently an ad blocker for the whole network. But I saw that Jeff Geerling was at Flyover Camp, and he had a talk about the cluster of RPIs or the Raspberry Pis that he's been building since 2012, 2013, something like that, and how it taught him everything he knows about Kubernetes. Did you catch that talk by any small chance?
I actually did go to that talk because
You're kidding.
Because I was like, oh, that sounds really fun, and I'd like to see what he does. Is he going to use straight K8s, or is he going to use that K3s distribution that I heard about?
Yeah, the tiny one. Yeah.
What was funny to me is that I remember watching a talk that he gave, not about Kubernetes, but about Ansible, way back in the day at MidCamp, with a very similar block of Raspberry Pis and a Raspberry Pi cluster in a box. And I really wanted to see what he was going to do with this. So, sure, I went to it.
And was it everything you wished it could be? I mean, I looked at the slides, and there was a shout out to Socket Wench in one of the slides.
Yeah, I was like thankful. I was in the front row, and no one could see how I was blushing furiously the entire time. Like, oh, stop talking about me, please. This is your talk.
That's great. I mean, you guys are, related and connected by Kubernetes. So how wonderful that would be the case. So can you give me a quick synopsis of the talk? What was the nugget that you took out of it?
So what was interesting is that Jeff has built a small Kubernetes cluster using standard distribution Kubernetes to run on, I think it's 4 or 5 Raspberry Pis that are.
I think it's 4.
I think it's 4 now. 4 Raspberry Pis with a single Ethernet switch with power over Ethernet, so that it reduces the amount of additional circuitry and cables he has to carry around to power them all together.
Hold up. He's actually powering the RPIs now through power over Ethernet? Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
Yeah, you can
of course you could.
Board for that. It's
That's
not
awesome.
Really complicated.
That's so great. So he has. So I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you there. What was the nugget?
Well, he didn't even mention the power over Ethernet except for one thing. But I was looking at the screenshots, like, oh, you're using power over Ethernet now. That's nice.
That is nice. That's nice.
So a lot of the talk was about how he was running his own personal site using a Raspberry Pi cluster out of his home network. And I used to run my own single node server out of a home network way back many, many years ago. And there's a number of challenges that come with that out of the box. You tend not to get static IPs from most ISPs. They'll get a dynamic IP. Some of them don't like that you have a significant amount of outbound traffic or incoming traffic that's coming from the net, and they may block you for that reason if you're on a particular service tier. Some ISPs are better at that than others. It really depends. But running his own site on a Kubernetes cluster on Raspberry Pis, it's like, it reminds me of this meme that I saw passed around Kubernetes Twitter a while ago, which is the subtext is I deployed my blog on Kubernetes, and it's this big semi-trailer, and it has a toy truck trailer box in the middle of it, completely dwarfed by the full-size trailer. And that's kind of like, yeah, that's pretty accurate.
Well, I mean, if you ever get reddited or slash dotted, I guess maybe it'll survive?
Kind of. Like, it's
Okay.
there's
It's possible.
There's a degree of front-side caching, I think, that he also used, but it was... This kind of a project always comes across to me as not a serious, you should use this instead of traditional hosting, and more like, I wanted to see if I could do that, and it would be fun, and it's something to do, and it's something that lets me learn by doing, and that's, a worthy pursuit in its own right.
But if you look at the other side of that coin, you're hosting your own website. You own the hardware, you own the software, you own your site, you can see it. You're not putting the risk of hosting in another large company's data center, right? You own it all from top to bottom. And honestly, if you have a small blog and you're using your ISP's connection and you have this overkill of a Raspberry Pi cluster that is powering a static site, you're probably not going to ever get enough traffic to bring that thing down. You're probably fine.
Although I think Jeff's site is Drupal 8.
Oh, so not static.
No.
Yeah. Well, I'm very jealous of you getting to see that talk. That must have been pretty cool. I'm hoping that maybe we can get Jeff on the podcast to talk about his cluster and what he's been through and how it's evolved soon. So, Jeff, if you happen to be listening, watch out for an email from us about that. Let's talk about diversity at Flyover Camp. What did it look like? Were there kind of the usual casts of people that look like I do, white males, or like what did that look like amongst attendees and speakers this year?
So there certainly is a large contingent of white, straight, cis male people there as well. There was a lot of women there as well, and there were several POC as well. I didn't actually take any moment to really do any kind of head counts on that. It just never crossed my mind to log that kind of information. But I did sit with several people, which were really fascinating and really interesting to talk to, and that was really kind of nice.
I hope we can have more of that and more attention to that in the future, and we'll try to continue to talk about it and bring it up in our podcast as well. What about attendance as a whole at Flyover Camp? What was it comparable to Drupadelphia or to Twin Cities Drupal Camp? Did you get a feel for what it was like?
I think that it was more closer to the size of Twin Cities Drupal than Drupadelphia. Drupadelphia had a surprising amount of people in it, and it could have been complicated by the space because it was a smaller space than Flyover Camp or Twin Cities Drupal, but there was certainly a large number of people there.
Any particular sessions besides Jeff's that were memorable to you?
Oh, geez, I'd have to look it over because so much of it was kind of a blur. I was kind of sad that I missed John's session about 45 modules in 45 minutes. I caught the end of it.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, that would have been a really interesting talk to go to because literally every slide has a timer. So the talk is only 45 minutes long, so every slide is only a minute long.
So it's kind of like an Ignite session where it's, 30 seconds per slide, 20 slides, something like that?
I saw one by Rhea Dixon called Cloud Watching, which was all about creating logs and alerts using AWS CloudWatch. That was really fascinating. And it makes me wonder if there's a way to create similar mechanisms and use similar strategies in a purely open source implementation that doesn't rely on AWS's productized version of that.
What is CloudWatch?
It's kind of an event and log tracking mechanism meant for distributed logging. There's a lot of that I didn't get into because it was mostly a case study about how they implemented it and how they solved their own problems. So there was a lot of additional research that I'd love to circle back to, but it was a really good session and I really enjoyed it.
So is CloudWatch then kind of similar to Splunk?
I think that it's a bit similar to Splunk. I know that there might be part of that that's similar to Prometheus and Grafana, which is a common Kubernetes logging mechanism.
Yeah, Prometheus is pretty widespread as well, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So a couple of good sessions. Generally, you had a good time at the camp, gave 2 wonderful talks. Where was the camp? Was it at the university?
I believe it was. And that it was a pretty good location, although because it is in the middle of Missouri, I did have a problem getting to and from the camp because I didn't have a car rental. So I ended up walking there, and that was a 10-minute walk actually it was a 20-minute walk in Missouri in June, which was a bit warmer than I'm used to.
Yeah, I guess the flip side of that is it could have been Missouri in December or January. So
I mean, I would have been fine with that, but that's me. I like winter.
Well, go figure. I like it too. So what do you know? Okay, so event was the event venue was good. The attendance was comparable to TC Drupal. And before we wrap up, overall impression of the event. If there's another one next year, are you going to go?
I would love to go again. That was a lot of fun to go there, and it was a lot more interesting than I had expected it to be, which kind of lives up to the name.
That's great. Well, appreciate the time you spent with us today. Once again, thank you so much for being with me. It's really been a pleasure. Mm-hmm. Well, Tess Flynn, or Socket Wench, is the DevOps engineer here at TEN7, and she was just at Drupal Flyover Camp 2019, where she gave her talks, Return of the Clustering, Kubernetes for Drupal. Of course, that's the third in a trilogy. And the other talk, Dr. Upal is in, Health Check Your Site. Those slides are all online, and a recording of the sessions are also available. Just visit this episode's webpage for those links. You've been listening to the TEN7 Podcast. Find us online at ten7.com/podcast. And if you have a second, do send us a message. We love hearing from you. Our email address is podcast@ten7.com. Until next time, this is Ivan Stegic. Thank you for listening.